Okay, you're good to go whenever you're ready, Karthik.
You're on mute.
Okay, how about now? Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I'll be just presenting some of my more recent results and just trying to sell my product, my story, whatever you want to call it. So I would like this to be more of a discussion-based thing, so please just stop me at any point. If you see something's not clear, maybe it's not flowing well, or more clarification needed and all of that. So I do not have too many slides. I have about 15, I think. So definitely try to keep it more conversational. So, okay, that being said, yeah, just dive in. So yeah, so the story sort of starts with the Justice 40 initiative. I think the cool way to say it is J40 apparently, so I'm going to keep calling it J40. So J40 that was set out in 2021 stated that about 40% of all federal investment should go towards disadvantaged communities. And this statement sort of, made me wonder as to what being disadvantaged means. And just looking at literature, my conclusion was that words like insecurity, vulnerability, well-being are sort of used interchangeably. Maybe from a theoretical perspective, all of them are different, but usually in all these tools and policy drafts, these words are just thrown out. So I'll just use the definition that Justice 40 initiative is using, and then we'll sort of take it from there. So the way the Justice 40 initiative works is they've entrusted each department of the government with coming up with indicators for what disadvantaged means. So for example, here is the definition for energy that comes from the DOE. And census tracts are classified as being energy disadvantaged if they meet this criteria of being in the 90th percentile for energy cost in the national distribution, or having particulate matter levels again in the 90th percentile, and there's also an income cutoff. And if a census tract meets this criteria, they're classified as being disadvantaged. And similarly, there are other cutoffs and criteria for other aspects as well. So the DOT comes up with transportation and similarly housing. Currently, food is not included in the Justice 40 tool, but they do have connections with the USDA. So I think in the next version, they are going to include food as well, but I just included that here. And along with these, there are also other things like legacy pollution, climate change, risk, and health. So legacy pollution would be if a census tract is located very close to a mine, for example. Yes, Alison.
Can you explain why pollution shows up in the energy category?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it is, I don't know, exposure from, well, it's exposure, but I don't know why they relate that to energy. Yeah, I'm not sure as to, why they put in the PM 2.5 in the energy and not, I don't know, where else would they put it? Maybe they put it in the pollution one, maybe, or transportation.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems odd that it's placed under. I mean, I could see like because energy contributes to air pollution, but it just seems odd from a receptor standpoint. Anyway, I thought maybe there was some reason.
Yeah, I don't know.
The last time you showed this, Karthik, you didn't have the PM in the thing, you're sure that it's in there?
Yeah, I think the last time I showed, I made a map out of it, so I didn't include the PM in the map when I was making it, but the full definition includes, this is just copy pasted from the website.
And just to clarify, it's the average energy burden, the 90th percentile of the census tracts, or that everybody falls into the 90th percentile
No,
of the.
so it's the average expenditure divided by average household income for that tract. So everybody, yeah, it's not at the household level, it's census
Okay, yeah,
tract
that's what I
averaged.
thought. Yeah.
Yeah, the more I look at
And
the stranger the air pollution piece looks to me, so it's really weird.
mm,
All right, anyway, I'll go ahead and move on. Just find it strange.
and so the way they're doing it right now, being disadvantaged means facing at least one of all the vulnerabilities that we just talked about. So if you're facing either one of energy, food, housing, transportation, you're classified as a DAC, as a disadvantaged community. So here's just an example of the New York area, and the ones in red are the ones who are facing at least one insecurity. So, and the ones in blue are, could call them secure census tracts. So why do I like this? So first thing is multidimensionality is sort of captured. So everything is or. So even if you're facing at least one of any of those things, you're classified as a DAC. So, but again, that's at the census tract level, not at the household level. So there is that nuance there. And also by definition, not all of them are monetary. Although there's a lot of costs and income poverty thresholds that went into those definitions, but we did see definitions beyond income. So there's some built environment and traffic density and things like that that go in. So that's also good. And there's always room for introduction of new indicators into this tool, because as long as you have a tract level data for the whole country, you can throw that in and add another vulnerability. So that's good. And what is it that I do not like about this, or what can be improved, I guess, is one, yeah, we would like to see multidimensionality at the household level rather than at the tract level. And we also wanted to see if what is it that income and expenditure measures are missing out on. So what is it that they don't capture? So ultimately sort of boil down to how are we going to choose new indicators that sort of capture this disadvantage? Yes.
I think my question is arising around the disadvantages and this expressed need for multidimensionality at the household level. I guess I'd like to understand a little better why that's a need. And I'll say, I certainly from like the granularity, it's nice to have more granular information, but I guess when I think about it, like that's not how resources get delivered typically, like household to household. They tend to flow at higher scales. So what's the value of having household level information?
Yeah, I will get to that towards the end of the talk.
Sure.
So if that's not answered by the end, then we'll come back to that.
No problem. Sorry to jump ahead.
No, that is a pretty valid question. So yes, so the question is, to me, was, well, how do we choose indicators that actually capture being disadvantaged? And well, this is not a new struggle. So measuring human well-being is perhaps as old as civilization. So it's nothing new. So there's different approaches that sort of the theoreticians have taken and which has been implemented by policymakers as well. So yeah, we could definitely think about income and poverty thresholds or expenditure cutoffs, which sort of calling them monetary indicators. And you could sort of, design policy around these. And in perhaps a different way to think about this is what do you actually get out of spending, and thinking about what basic needs households would need in order to be well. And this is not a limited set, but you could think of things like health, education, shelter, electricity, which are perhaps more materialistic, but also things like social freedom, better relationships. But the challenge with this basic needs approach is you really do not take into account what people's preferences are. So an example I can think of is when making transportation choices, people might want to travel longer in order to have a higher paying job, or maybe you want to take a scenic route. And you cannot really put a cutoff as to what a commuting time should be. So that is where the basic needs approach sort of falls short, but it is still a pretty good way to think about well-being. And sort of related, but also unique in its own way, is the capabilities approach, is where you do not really focus on the outcome, but more on empowering people to do what they would want to do. So you provide them with things like education, shelter, but the ultimate goal is that people have the freedom to choose for themselves. And what that set should be is again under debate, because it has to be a democratic process, and that's how you come up with a list of things that fall under the capabilities approach. And another way to think about well-being is directly asking people how they feel about their life and their emotional well-being. So that's the subjective-based approach to well-being. So I think I'm going to take a easier route here by just claiming that, well, there's no one framework that can explain well-being, because yeah, this is a debate that will go on forever. But perhaps a solution could be to look at something at the intersection of these frameworks if we were to have that kind of data. So what I mean by that is a space somewhere here where you ask people how they feel about their basic needs, rather than measuring them or asking more broad-based questions about life in general, because then there's so much going on in your life, so you cannot rely on what people say about their lives in general. But perhaps there's a space in between where you could sort of capture all of these. So that's sort of the route I've decided to take. Yes, I listen.
I have another question, sir. What do you mean by democratize well-being? What does that mean in this example?
Maybe I think I made up that thing, so it's my interpretation.
I guess
I mean my interpretation is having the freedom to say yes or no. So you leave it to the household to respond to the question of how they feel about energy, how they feel about travel, how they feel about housing. And you're not imposing on the household that, oh, if you don't meet a commuting time of 30, you are insecure, or if you don't consume X megawatt hour per year you're insecure. So instead of putting arbitrary thresholds to insecurity, you leave it to the household to say how they, whatever they feel about things.
Well, so okay, if that's the case, I think something I'm trying to understand. Okay, so the red circle, subjective based measurement. Are you saying that right now the red circle that's not the part of the red circle that's not within the area of overlap between blue, black, and red is just asking about satisfaction, happiness, and stress, but not about deprivation, and therefore a subjective basic needs deprivation assessment would be new and different from the subjective satisfaction, happiness, stress. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So,
And
for
that
the
would
part-
also be different from
sorry.
like just telling someone you didn't meet this threshold, like the 30-minute commute, therefore you're deprived. Or I meant to say it
Correct.
the wrong.
Exactly. Yes, that is the interpretation.
Okay,
So
thanks.
I would, so I would characterize this red part away from, the other three as under the classic Kahneman paper, right, where you had income versus life satisfaction. So I would sort of characterize all those studies in that area.
Mhm.
And then, the intersection is where you specifically ask people about, specific subsets of their life. So,
That helps, thank you.
and then,
Yeah.
okay.
Mm.
And we do still want to sort of validate all these approaches against each other. So just to be sure. So even if people say they're insecure, we do want to check, well, are people just saying things, or is it actually backed up by them facing more disconnections or them actually waiting longer at a bus stop? We do have the opportunity to sort of validate these frameworks against each other when we sort of propose newer ways to look at well-being. So so I'll also try to do that where we won't be completely relying on how people feel. We'll also try to back that up with objective metrics. Yeah, Narasimha, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, this you're trying to set up a framework to think about thresholds of well-being, not what is well-being, right? Because nobody claims that income is well-being. I mean,
Mhm.
it's kind of it's understood theoretically that income is a means to achieve well-being, but we just kind of use it as a proxy. And so it's more that that red circle represents, you're trying to find out whether inquiries about whether people fall below a threshold of life satisfaction scores that they would consider acceptable in life overlaps with thresholds defined by having people having certain levels of basic services, overlaps with policymakers defining a certain level of income as being above or below poverty, right? And so that question is, it's more, are there overlap? Can you define this area of overlap in these different, because the questions that are being asked in these different circles are different, right?
That is right. And I think my struggle with this is mostly, well, once we show that there is overlap, well, what next, right? So we cannot go down the route of saying, well, one is better than the other. I think all we can show is, hey, look, these are the people who are missing out because of current policies, and this is what their life state is, and this is what can be improved if you also targeted these households. So I think that's probably the overarching narrative that I'm trying to take. So so the question, big question is, what is the subjective well-being cost of households' basic needs not being met? And can additional spending compensate for this deprivation? And coming to the question of heterogeneity, what kind of households are being most affected by this deprivation, and what can we do about that? So coming back to the question of how do we choose indicators? So the way I've done this is looking at objective and subjective deprivations separately. So for the objective list, I've chosen just for food, energy, housing, travel. So these are the 4 metrics. And similarly, the corresponding subjective deprivations are based on the question directly asked to the households, or in some cases interpreted in a way that would point towards insecurity. So what I mean by that is, for energy insecurity, these would be households who are skipping meals or have their household at an uncomfortable temperature, or they've been feeling really cold in their house. So that's how I would classify houses as being energy insecure, and other definitions for food, housing, and travel. And well, one, we are trying to see if these basic needs deprivations are correlated to your overall life satisfaction, your overall stress levels. Is there a connection there that we can make? And to this connection, we would want to introduce heterogeneity in terms of race, geography, tenure, things like that. And of course, all of this is sort of mediated through income or expenditure. So this is just sort of a reframing of all the different circles we've seen previously, but just sort of laying down what exact variables are going into making these connections. And I won't talk too much about the data set because I think we've spent so much time in previous meetings talking about how we sort of assemble this data set. So I'll just sort of show you what the data set actually looks like. So we have the American Community Survey, and then we have a bunch of specialized surveys that sort of bring in different aspects of energy, housing, expenditure, travel, and the subjective well-being in general. So once we've assembled this data set, it is like any other microdata. So you can play around finding correlations, doing regressions, and seeing just relationships between all of these different things. So I'll mostly focus on energy, and then I'll expand the results to housing, transportation, and food as well. But just let's start with energy, and then we'll get to the others. So here on the y-axis, we have the percentage of households that are insecure. And on the x-axis, we have energy expenditure, just in deciles, so this is dollar amounts. And what we generally see, this is by race. You could generally see that the number of households that claim to be insecure decreases as they spend more money, which makes sense. But more interestingly, even for a given amount of spending, we do see that Black and Latino households have much higher insecurity compared to the white households, which could sort of indicate towards more broader systemic and service related issues, because why would you, or other life conditions, because for the same amount of money spent, you are feeling more insecure for energy. So this is just how people, yes, Alison.
Sorry, I'm interrupting. We said we could energy insecure household, your y-axis, sorry. Is that was that the
so that's
by them saying they feel insecure, or by the category they fall into?
so by them saying that they're insecure. So this is the subjective feeling of insecurity.
Okay, so it's like
So-
a single question,
Uh,
like,
so in the base survey, we have 3 questions.
uh-huh,
So did you have your house at an uncomfortable temperature?
yeah,
Did you skip meals in order to pay your bills? And were you uncomfortably cold in the past winter? And if they've answered yes to any of those questions, they would be categorized as insecure.
okay.
And if they answered no, they would be categorized as secure.
But they have to answer
And
no
the
to
way-
all 3 of those questions to be secure.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Correct.
Okay, so can I
And
ask
the
a
way-
follow-up on that? Sorry.
Yes. Yes.
So if you, like, of those 3, 2 of those questions seem more subjective than the, did you skip meals to pay for energy?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen, does the percentage of insecurity change much if you base the variable on just one question?
No, I have not checked that. I mean, it is a valid thing to check. The only reason we use it that way because the EIA defines it that way. So we sort of base it off the
Oh, okay.
EIA's definition.
Okay,
So, but I mean, I could definitely break it down by those 3 questions to see, which is maybe there's one that is contributing more than others. So,
mhm. Okay. Thanks for fielding the question.
yeah. And then the way to read this would be for the first decile, there's about 50% of Black households that turn out to be energy insecure. So that's just a fraction of households in that particular decile. And this is how people or households feel. And what I've done is I've actually looked at a more objective metric. So this is energy insecurity defined by the number of days that households did not have heating or cooling or had a disconnection. And what we see is that the houses that are energy insecure, that's the true condition, do have much higher number of insecurity days compared to the houses that did not experience insecurity. So this is just sort of to suggest that what people are saying or how people feel is backed up by the objective metric that we can measure and don't have to rely on what people are saying. And you could slice the population in different ways. So here is another example, just looking at renters versus owners. Taking the same metric. So the one on the left is the subjective one, and the one on the right is the corresponding objective metric. And here again, we do see that households that claim to be insecure also have more days where they didn't have heating, cooling, or had some sort of a disconnection. But interestingly, yeah, for the renters, it does go up, which was slightly surprising. So I do have to investigate why your insecurity goes up with more spending. But yeah, that's how it is at this point. All this is to say that subjective feelings of deprivation are sort of correlated with the corresponding objective metrics. And you could do similar exercises for food, housing, and transportation, and have seen similar trends as well.
I had a question, Karthik. Were these all for single family homes? I might have missed that, both for renters and owners.
For renters, and so there's no other demarcation. It's just renters and owners. So everybody is included. Every type of household is included. And we could also look at how this energy insecurity is correlated to your overall life satisfaction as well. So here, the fill circles are, again, it's just the average life satisfaction of the energy insecure households, and the empty circle is the average life satisfaction of the secure households. So for the lowest energy spending, we see this big clear difference between both these groups. And we wanted to see if, if you spent more on your energy needs, would this gap narrow down? And what we saw was that even if you keep spending more and more, even if you're in the highest category of spending for energy, there is still a big gap between secure and the energy insecure households, suggesting that energy insecurity does probably correlated with a big difference in describing your overall life satisfaction. Again, yeah, just to make it clear, all of these are correlations, so it's very difficult to establish causality, but that is something that I've been thinking about, but not yet. So yeah, so this is just energy insecurity, and what I've done is I've created this insecurity index, so where I score households on a scale of 0 to 4. So 0 would be households that have not faced any of these insecurities, and 4 would be households that have faced all of these. So 4 would be the worst off, and 0 would be the most secure. And I wanted to see, similar relationships for these with this insecurity index. So I have a similar plot here. So life satisfaction on the y-axis, but instead of energy expenditure, now I have total household expenditure that includes all these categories. I mean, one could also think about doing this with income. I think that's an equally valid approach, but I've just chosen expenditure for this presentation. So first, so this is how life satisfaction changes with expenditure for the group which has an index of 0. So for the most secure households, I think life satisfaction generally increases, I think, which is in line with what one would expect with income as well. And then we wanted to see what happens once you start adding more insecurities. So the next one, the lighter red one, is households with a score of 1. We do this see a small gap, which kind of narrows down as you go the higher and higher spending, maybe suggesting that higher spending could compensate for some of these earlier differences that we see in life satisfaction. But then if we keep increasing the score to 2 and 3, we now actually see very clear differences for any given decile, more so in between. There's a huge gap between, for example, 4 going from a score of 3 to 0. There's a vast improvement in life satisfaction, even for the same amount of spending. And that is true for even group 1, which in theory are the poorest households. And even there we see differences in life satisfaction as you keep facing more insecurities. So all of this was sort of to establish the way I've been thinking about this, insecurities, and if they actually are linked. What people say is it linked to what is actually happening and to their overall life satisfaction. But then I wanted to go back to the Justice 40 map and see how would these metrics fare with what is already out there. So let's go back to the initial map again. So this is the map of New York City at the tract level. And if you I just highlighted 2 neighborhoods that Justice 40 tool at this moment identifies as being disadvantaged. And what I've done is I've created a map based on the insecurity index that I've just talked about. And these are the percentage of households that are facing more than one insecurity. So this the definition is sort of analogous to how Justice 40 tool is defined, where tracts are considered disadvantaged if they're facing at least one of all the conditions that they had. So in a similar way, having a score of 1, 2, 3, or 4 means you're facing one of these insecurities. So our map is currently at the Puma level. So there's a slight difference of scale, but I think the message still holds. So yes, even our map, I've just identified the 2 regions, which are kind of the same area as the ones that the Justice 40 tool identified. So these would be areas that where 90 to 100% of the households are facing at least one insecurity. So we are sort of capturing similar neighborhoods that the Justice 40 tool is capturing. But that's not that impressive, because I wanted to see what else can we do with what we have. So started digging a little deeper into this map and trying to understand what exactly is going on in these areas. So if I were to break down the type of insecurities that people in the Bronx neighborhood are facing, so I have here the percentage of households and that fall into each of these index groups. And what we find is in the Bronx, there's about 40% households that fall into a score of 2. And there's about maybe 25% that have scores of 1 and 3. And there's about 5% households that are completely secure and have a score of 0. And these are the households that would be captured with both our tool and the Justice 40 tool as well. But then I wanted to look at what's happening elsewhere. So this would be, according to the current definition, non-dark regions. So in Manhattan, for example, there are about 20% households that are completely secure, but there are about 45% that have a score of 1 and maybe another 25% with a score of 2. And these are the households that are not being captured under the current definition. So not only that, it also affects their overall life satisfaction. So for example, if you were to see the average life satisfaction scores of both these regions and how that changes with the insecurity, we see that, Manhattan and the area generally has higher life satisfaction, but once you come down to a score of 3, there already seems to be some overlap between both these regions. So to suggest that, regardless of where you live, if you are facing these insecurities, it's going to take a hit on your life satisfaction. And this hit is perhaps not being fully captured by the current set of measures. And we could also be a little more rigorous with these methods, because right now what I've just shown you are mostly averages. what I've done is I've run a full-scale regression with a bunch of controls for race, location, education. And even after controlling for all of these, you still see that these insecurities are correlated negatively with your overall life quality. So yeah, I think that's sort of the overall results I have for today. But just to sort of summarize, I think the key findings would be, the first one is building the data set and then sort of establishing these empirical relationships between the different frameworks, and also looking at mediating factors of race, expenditure, geography. And what I've tried to show is that existing metrics of perhaps income and expenditure thresholds do not capture service deprivations completely. And these sub deprivations are linked to both objective metrics and also your overall life quality. And we've also seen how expenditure, spending more, doesn't really bridge the gap between the secure and insecure households. Maybe this is linked to broader service or systemic shortcomings. Yeah, another direction that I've sort of been thinking about is also looking at the other end of the spectrum. So we mostly looked at deprivations, but we could also ask the question about how much is enough, and yeah, can we come up with thresholds and things like that? But that's a whole different talk. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for today. And yeah, happy to discuss more and talk more about, yeah, what do you think? How else can we think about presenting or sort of shaping this product?
All right, does anyone have any questions for Karthik or just anything in general that you wanted to bring up to the group?
Karthik, I just wanted to kind of push you to address Allison's first question. You know, we're talking about what's the value of looking at household level overlapping deprivations rather than looking at the tract level. And you've kind of focused on confirming what was found using a similar criteria with at least one of the deprivations. And you're saying at the household level, you end up with, okay, we target the same areas. When we zoomed in, I was expecting that maybe you'll show contrary kind of a figure. You know, I was imagining that if you, based on the tract level, you haven't picked, but based on the household level, you end up finding that you're ignoring certain people who deserve to be called disadvantaged. You know, that would be something that would be useful to find out, because I'm thinking people would agree that if you had multiple of these deprivations, that are worse off. So now I'm thinking, if the DAC definition had said that you're defined as a DAC if you have all three of the burdens and not just one, right? Then maybe there'd be fewer that are selected, of course. But then in that case, if you compare it at the household level, could you end up with a situation where you have not picked one, but you have a pretty high bar for those who have a lot of deprivations at the household level, but not enough in total comparison to the compared to other tracts. So you end up missing out on people that deserve to be called disadvantaged communities, but are in census tracts that are not defined as DAC because you're looking at the average. It seems to me that would justify looking at the household level, because ultimately what we're after is household level. I mean, Edison was talking about the fact that in practical terms, you target areas and not people. That's just practical. But I think the objective of policy is to target those who are disadvantaged at a household level. So I would have thought if it's possible to kind of compare, districts or tracts. How many tracts are you missing people that ought to be targeted when you look at the household level and if you look at the tract level? That to me would be a value that you want to demonstrate. If it's the case, if you're finding that you're ending up capturing mostly the right places because over 90% of people are suffering on all these dimensions, then it's pretty good that you've captured, the right set of tracts. But to me, I think that
Right.
there's people for missing certain tracts because you focused on kind of a relative definition at a national level.
Well, yes. So for example, if you look at this, right? So the Manhattan, let's say they have 75% insecure based on this definition, and those people are not captured in the current DAC. So it's now I don't know how we'd argue for that. Do we just say, well, yeah, look at this, there's 75% people who are insecure and you're still not capturing them? Is that how?
But you may find that even
Good.
in the CJUST too, if you had taken 70. I mean, that's not an advantage of looking at the household level yet. I mean, the DAC definition is 90th percentile. If the DAC definition was 75th percentile,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that is, well, that is true. So I don't know how we can defend, anything in that, because, if you just move your, exactly what you said. You can capture more areas. So
what I'm thinking is that there could be a lot of tracts in the country where you don't fall into the 90th percentile. But there are a lot of households in those tracts that actually do.
Correct.
That's the advantage of looking at the household level. That's what I'm trying to say. So here you've confirmed that there's some matching in the worst off people. But when you get to the other percentiles that you've left out, we can identify households that actually fall into the intended category at the household level. And I think it's useful to capture how many are we missing around the country that are in non-DAC defined tracts.
Right. Yeah, no, I get your, but even then, I think we need our own cutoff or something, right? So we have to say, well, everybody with a score of 2 and 3, that's our DAC definition. And then we go with that, and then we make this comparison.
We could do that, but to start with, we could use exactly the same definition, but rather than using tract averages, make it 90th percentile at the household level.
As a household. Okay, yeah.
Because we can do that.
Yeah, we can do that, yeah.
I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud. I don't know how that sounds to others. If that's logical or not.
Well, I think something I'm trying to understand, Narasimha, or maybe from Karthik, is what the problem is. Like right now, if a census tract doesn't, if at the census tract level, certain criteria are not met, is anyone in that census tract prohibited from accessing, say, funds that would go towards initiatives that fit within the Justice 40 framework? Is the problem that people are prevented from? I'm trying to think of an example. Like, let's say there's like a rideshare subsidy. Like, are they not allowed to get that subsidy because they're in a census tract that is deemed not insecure, not eligible, even if at the household level they can demonstrate their need? Is that the real problem? They would be turned away?
Yeah,
I think so. Another example is, I think, like cyclone relief. I think they actually use some of these data to see if you are in the threshold, if your tract is in that threshold for cyclone relief numbers, threshold thing. And if you're not, then even if you're affected by a cyclone, you don't have access to those resources. So,
I mean, the purpose of this Justice 40 is to prioritize the DAX and channeling federal investments. So literally, if there's certain $1 billion put aside for home improvement, they would want to ensure that 40% of that is spent on DAX, which is much smaller than 40% of the population of the country.
Right.
So there is a focus on that. And the question is, are you missing out on a lot of eligible households by the definition that is being used just simply because there are data limitations in identifying people?
Mm-hmm.
And so if it turns out that you're missing a good chunk of people who may be equal in number to those who are in the DAX, then that's a problem of just data limitations that's preventing proper targeting using exactly the same criteria, because this is a census tract average level.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that's the case. We have to find out, but I think that's what it's useful for. So we should try to look at that, among other things, of course.
It seems like it would be useful to know if you only identified census tracts that met current criteria, would you still end up serving a larger number of households? Or would there still be a larger number of households identified than those that can be served? Yes, there might be the potential that households are not getting identified. And that seems worth knowing. But it seems like to put that in context, it's also worth knowing, even if nothing changed about household identification right now, how many households are represented by the census tracts identified as DAX? And does that exceed the number of households that would need to be served in order to meet Justice 40 initiative? I don't actually know.
I think that's also valid to look inside the DAX, because since you're using averages, the census tracts may have very different internal distributions.
Right.
If you have a very unequal DAC, there actually could be a lot more people in that DAC than in another one that's much more equally distributed, and we can pick that up. So yeah, absolutely. That's another thing that one can do, is look at almost little genies of insecurity, something like that, in terms of or genies of energy burdens. Imagine if you had a distribution of energy burdens.
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought was useful potentially, and I wanted to get your feedback, all of you, there's a lot of subjectivity to these. There's no normative, easy normative way to define what's the threshold that's unacceptable for any of these. And that's why they've chosen a percentile. I thought it's really useful to have the life satisfaction as a common metric, to see, well, how much do these deprivations mean to people? I mean, we're treating them equally. The DAC is defined as either you have an energy insecurity or a transport insecurity or something else. But from the life satisfaction analysis, we're able to actually assess quantitatively what these deprivations mean to people. And I think from Karthik's analysis, he hasn't showed it here fully, but we're seeing that the energy insecurity seems to have a stronger impact on people's life satisfaction than the other ones. For what it's worth, I mean, depends on how it's defined, of course. And Karthik, you're pretty sure this is an and for the energy insecurity? For those ones that Alison was asking about, the disconnection, the uncomfortable temperature, you said it's
an or.
or, it's not an and. That's what I thought. Okay. Because you had
Yeah,
said
it's
at one
or,
point it's an
or.
and.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
okay.
it's all or. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
more sense. Because there's no reason why rich people would be claiming to be energy insecure in terms of spending too much.
Yeah, it's all or.
Or keep reducing or foregoing basic necessities to the home energy bill. Wait, so it's only two things? Reducing or foregoing basic needs or keeping home at unhealthy temperature
Or feeling cold.
or feeling cold.
Or feeling cold. Yeah.
Those are questions from two different surveys, right? Feeling cold versus feeling cold
correct.
is
So
from
the
AHS, right?
correct.
So are wealthier homes showing up as energy insecure because they might say yes to their reducing basic needs due to home energy bill, or they maybe feel cold?
Or they were feeling cold. Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised by that too. I think the sample is really small, first of all, at high incomes,
Okay,
but still it's useful to figure out why they're saying that. I also
Yeah.
think that the uncomfortably cold from the AHS, and now that in Rex we have this unhealthy temperature, they may be redundant.
uh-huh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we should have both.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that question in Rex before, which is why we used the feeling
Eh.
cold one from AHS.
yeah.
I don't think that'll change things much, but just to be clean.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like since a lot of your work seems dependent on the energy and security rank or percentage, it seems worth understanding pretty deeply why people are showing up as being energy insecure, given that there are multiple responses that could put them in that category, and they are, to me, they are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's worthwhile to break those 2 or 3 things down to see if there's one that's contributing more than others.
Do you happen to know if the questions are asked in the context where the person knows that they're being asked about energy insecurity?
Mm,
Like, are they saying in the context of energy insecurity, how often have you felt
No.
cold?
No, I think it's the EIA's interpretation of those answers.
Okay.
The people are simply asked, how many months have you kept your house at an unhealthy temperature? 0, 1 to 2 every month.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do they know what unhealthy temperature is?
It's their own judgment of what they consider.
It's their own judgment. Okay.
And we don't know what that is, which could be different for different people.
Okay. And again, we're asking like one person to represent the household. So it could be
Yeah,
like,
Yeah.
their opinion.
okay.
Totally.
Well, I know it's taken us to 12. Sorry. Thanks for the presentation, Karthik.
Oh no, this is really
Okay.
useful. I got so much out of this. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Karthik. And if you'll send me your slides, I'll include them in the notes for anybody who wants to go back for it. And also the recording will be in there as well.
Yeah, sounds good.
Have a good day, and I'll end the meeting. Thanks.